Now, without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's welcome Greg Weisman to the show. Greg, welcome to the Shortbox. How you doing today?
Good. How are you, Bothered?
Greg, not too shabby. I had a lot of fun researching for this episode, and actually, I want to say 2 years ago, I did a spinoff podcast or spinoff, yeah, basically a podcast, but a spinoff podcast for the Short Box. It was for our patrons, and we called it Pilot's License, where every episode we would pick one cartoon series and watch the pilot episode for. And sure enough, we did a Gargoyles episode almost like 2 years ago. And now, granted, the first pilot episode of Gargoyles, as you obviously know, was a 5-parter. So it was like one of our longest episodes. And I remember learning so much. And it's kind of awesome to like go back, watch a couple of the episodes and, just kind of like remember growing up with this show and how pivotal Keith David's voice is to my childhood. So this was a lot of fun to research. So thank you for asking. And I'm glad that you're on the show, man.
I'm glad to be here.
Greg, is it safe to say that you might have like the coolest job? I mean, you've written for plenty of animated shows that are beloved. You've been writing comics since the 80s. You've written, novels. I mean, you even do voice acting. Like, if you weren't doing writing, if you weren't a professional writer, what do you think you'd be doing?
Starving.
That was a phenomenal. It caught me off guard. So you could not see yourself doing anything other than writing. I guess.
No,
When did you get the?
I'm a storyteller. If this were the Middle Ages, I'd be that troubadour on a mule going from town to town with a lute, telling stories that way. It's good it's not the Middle Ages because I don't know how to play the lute, and no one wants to see me in tights, believe me. But I've been a storyteller my whole life. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do. It's just who I am. It's intrinsic.
Here's a 2-part question. Do you remember the first story that you wrote? And I guess what was the moment that you felt like, hey, this is a viable career field. I can do this.
I'm not sure it is a viable career even now.
I don't know, Greg. I don't know.
But
you prove otherwise.
I've got a body of work I'm very proud of, but the notion of what I've done being a career implies a kind of upward trajectory. And if I'm being honest, which I prefer to be, every time I've had a hit show, I then had to turn around and start over again, find a new thing to do and build myself, start as a freelance writer again, and build myself back up and get that gig show running again. It's very rare. I think once in my life did I go from one show directly to another show successfully. It almost never happens. It's a tough calling, I guess. I don't want to oversell it. I've had a good life. I've done well enough for myself and my family, and like I said, I got a body of work I'm very, very proud of. But I don't want to pretend either that it's somehow been easy. It hasn't. So it was a 2-part question. That was part 1. What was part 2 again?
I guess what was the story or project or job that, you decided, hey, I'm going to go all in on this?
Well, I mean, if you're going all the way back, I guess it depends how far back you want to go. When I was in 2nd grade, we had spelling words, and our homework was to write each word in a sentence. But instead of doing that, I mean, I did that, but I made all the sentences play as a story. So, once a week we got these spelling words, and everyone else is just writing, if the spelling word is mule, they're writing, he rode the mule to school. And if the next spelling word was carrot, it's like, he ate the carrot. There was no connective tissue between the sentences, but I would take those sentences. I would take those words and write them into a story as opposed to just writing random sentences with them. And my 2nd grade teacher was sort of tickled by that. And she took all my stories and she put them together into this little book. And my fate was set then, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, I got praise, and I got this book, which I still have.
Wow.
And in second grade, let me tell you something. I'm an old guy, so second grade was a long bloody time ago. And over 50 years, half a century ago. But it mattered. I when I was 19, I started freelancing for DC Comics while I was in college. And I think, though, the big sort of go for it moment for me was I was an executive at Disney. I created and developed Gargoyles. And it got to the point where I said to my bosses, I don't want to be an executive anymore. I want to go over and produce this show. And that was a risk, and it largely has paid off.
I'd say so, yeah.
I don't know if financially it's paid off so great, but from the standpoint of my happiness and everything like that, I think switching from I never really meant to be an executive, but I needed a job, and I got that job, and I actually did well at it. I was successful at it, but my heart was in writing, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I moved over and was co-showrunner with Frank Parr on Gargoyles. We put together what I think is a show that sort of stood the test of time.
I think that is very safe to say. Greg, I was on your website, S8. You can correct the I think it's, what is it, S8.com or S8.org?
Well, that's the host. That's not my website. My website is askgregweisman.com.
There we go. Yeah.
So it's hosted by S8.org. But if you want to go directly to my website, it's askgregweisman.com.
There we go. I was on that website today, and can I say, as someone that is into, like, just exploring websites, I work in marketing, like, I am in digital media as well. I had a blast on your website, man. I understand that you've had this website since 1997, and I bring this up because it almost. I'm not saying you're downplaying the success of Gargoyles, but I will say there is a rabid and very enthusiastic fan base for Gargoyles, as you obviously know. And I could have easily gotten lost in the archives, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about a site that's been around since 1997, like the early days of the internet. You have posts and that are talking about behind the scenes for Gargoyles with Young Justice. You take questions from fans. And I mean, that archive, just the question archive, is impressive. And then you've got like things that really tickle me, such as a media section with all these sound bites and sound clips from the show, which is where I got the growl today and many other sound drops. So I want to thank you
That's
for.
Not me. The media section isn't me. That's the host of SA.
Okay.
And other people who
Got it.
support that.
Well, big shout outs to them.
I have been since the late 90s. Been answering questions about Gargoyles and all the other things that I've worked on. And there's a searchable archive on the site.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not currently answering questions. I got a little burned out.
Sure.
You've answered Young Justice.
I feel like you've answered every possible question someone could have about either show. Like, it is an insane amount.
I kind of feel that way. I'm sure they could come up with new ones, but I think 98% of the questions people could ask have already been answered there. So go to the archive. It's searchable. I'll start answering questions again eventually, probably in about a year. But maybe a little less. But the point is that, again, 90+% of the questions you could think to ask have probably already been answered.
Yeah.
And if you search that archive, you can probably find the answer a lot faster than I would get around to answering.
Sure, yeah.
And it's been fun. I mean, I've engaged with the fans a lot since as early as, I want to say 96.
Wow.
And I have very good friends among the fandom, and I do this podcast every couple weeks or so called Voices from the Eerie, where we break down a Gargoyles episode in detail with other guests like our voice director, David Thomason, or with Frank Parr, or with Keith David, or Brent Spiner, or Jonathan Frakes, or Tom Adcox, etc. We've just had some great guests on the show. I mean, I'm not the host. I'm just a guest too, but we're on that show every, I'd say, 2 or 3 weeks, hosting an episode, covering another episode of the Gargoyles television series.
Greg, I guess in your own words and through your perspective, what is it about Gargoyles that has garnered such a dedicated fan base? I mean, we're talking about a show that is, coming up, on almost 30 years ago. Now, granted, there's a lot of
Actually,
comic
we
books.
had our 30th anniversary celebration last summer, so we're past 30 years now.
So 30 plus years. I guess what is it about Gargoyles, based on your interactions with the fans, that has resonated for them the most? Is it the characters? Is it the story? Like, is there any certain elements that like speak to the fans that has lasted this long?
I mean, ultimately, I think it comes down to the characters. I think there are a lot of elements. I think the themes of Gargoyles are universal and as relevant, if not more relevant today than they were in the 90s. Themes of don't judge a book by its cover, themes of empathy, themes of, individuals being othered because of their appearance or because they are different. And I think those themes resonate. But I think ultimately with Gargoyles, we had a phenomenal writing staff. We had 4 amazing story editors, starting with Michael Reeves, who was our head writer of season 1 and was story editor for season 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Britton Chandler Reeves, Carrie Bates, and Gary Sperling, plus a bunch of amazing writers working under the 4 of them. We had voice director Jamie Thomason and the most stellar cast of any that you could find ever, period. Edward Asner, Tom Adcox-Hernandez, Jeff Bennett, Bill Fagerbacke, Frank Welker, Keith David, Sally Richardson, Marina Sirtis, Jonathan Frakes, and those are just the regulars.
Yeah.
We had John Rhys Davies, we had David Warner, we had Roger Rees. I think one point I was in a session with for the show, and our voice director Jamie pointed out that we had simultaneously in this room 3 of the greatest Hamlets in history, all acting in Gargoyles at the same time. We had multiple Star Trek actors: Nichelle Nichols, LeVar Burton, Michael Dorn.
I think I joked. I think I joked on that recap episode that it seemed like Gargoyles was the kind of Star Trek was the funnel where a lot of the actors ended up landing. It was like their second job for the most part, because you guys had so many actors from Star Trek on there.
Yeah, and there was a logical reason for that. Marina Sirtis auditioned for Demona. She was the first person to audition for Demona and nailed it. And Jonathan Frakes auditioned for Xanatos and nailed it. So we had 2 Star Trek actors in the room almost every week. They're villains, so they're not literally in every episode, but a lot of them, particularly during season 1. And so, when we were thinking about who we need to cast, for example, we'd be in the booth and we'd be taking a break from the recording, and Jamie, who was also our casting director as well as our voice director, would say to me, okay, what are we going to need for next week? Looking ahead, what are we going to need? And I'm like, well, we need Goliath's brother, so he needs to have big, deep chops like Keith has. And so, but I'm looking through the glass at Marina and Jonathan, and I'm thinking, what about Michael Dorn? And the good news for us is that Marina and Jonathan loved the show, talked it up at Paramount, where they were still making Next Generation. People forget Gargoyles was happening simultaneously with Next Generation. And so, they'd go in and they say, hey, it's a great gig. Hey, Michael, no makeup. You don't have to get here 4 hours early to put on your warp.
He's like, sold.
No costumes, no makeup. Hell, you don't even have to memorize the script because you can have it on a music stand right in front of you. And the scripts are good. They're fun. And so, we got a lot of Star Trek actors because they had heard from Jonathan and Marina that it was a good gig. And then at some point, I would never cast someone just because they were in Star Trek. But, we had Nichelle Nichols playing Diane Maza, Lisa Maza's mother. And we began to realize there was a certain publicity value to that.
For sure, yeah.
And, at some point it became kind of a challenge. Can we get someone from DS9? Can we
Hmm.
get someone from Voyager? And so we kept doing it. Again, never at the expense of character. But if you can get Kate Mulgrew to play Titania, why wouldn't you? If you can get, Comini, if you can get Brent Spiner, why wouldn't you do that? So it became a great source for us because Paramount was just over the hill, and they had just a ton of phenomenal actors performing in various Star Trek shows. So we made use of that.
Hell yeah. Yeah. I mean, stellar, stellar voice casting. I mean, doing the rewatch, the show holds up so well, and it made sense why someone like my dad would enjoy it. And then at the same time, I was talking to my wife about when we were doing the episode about rewatching it, and she was like, my mom really loved that show a lot too. And I guess it just goes to show that it was a show that appealed to kids because, personally speaking, because of the character designs, the concept, the action. But at the same time, it totally engrossed someone like my dad and my mother-in-law because of the themes, the Shakespearean atmosphere and the themes you guys were exploring. I think it's a show that holds up really well, especially in retrospective. But I want to ask Greg. That said, between animation and TV, comics and prose and writing novels, which one do you enjoy writing for more? Like, do you favor any one medium over the other just slightly?
No, not from the standpoint of writing. I mean, television pays more than comics, and I have a mortgage to pay, and my kids are all grown up now. I don't have
Yeah.
to worry about them. But I had 2 kids, and I had to make sure that they were fed and clothed and all that kind of thing. So I probably leaned into TV writing and production as much as possible because it just paid more. And by the way, an animation pays nothing compared to live action, and I never was able to break into live action. Not for lack of trying, but I wasn't. And so, there's a certain hierarchy that comes with monetary concern, realistic monetary concern. But in terms of the writing, what was always fun for me was alternating. I love working in television. It's an extremely collaborative medium. Working with literally hundreds of people. And then, I love working in comics where you're working with like 3 or 4 people
Yeah.
tops, and then I really loved writing novels because then I'm just on my own. And what was great would be, I'd work on one, and the great thing about all that collaboration is that you've got all these people helping you realize the vision and helping you bring it to life and all this sort of stuff, and that's great. The thing that's not as great about it is that you've got all these people doing this stuff. So, they've got their ideas too. And so you're all working to make the show as good as possible. And that helps. But, sometimes you do get frustrated that, you had to compromise on this or not do this bit or do a bit that you didn't want to do because your partners are all like, hey, I really love this. And you're like, well, I don't love it, but okay. And so that it's nice to switch over to a novel where I don't have to please anybody but myself. On the
Yeah.
other hand, when I'm working on a novel, it's all on me, 100% on me. I've got no musical score to help guide the audience's emotion. I've got to make that musical score come through in the prose. I've got no voice actors to make my dialogue come alive, so it's got to come alive on its own by itself. It's hard. And so, I would work on a novel for a while and then just feel like lonely. And it would be great to be able to go work on TV for a while. And I'd do that for a while and feel surrounded and go work on the novels. So, I'm a kind of contrary individual, so I'm constantly bouncing from one thing to another. But I do think that all of it's the same. My process is very similar for all these media.
Yeah.
very simple.
Now, I guess what did they say? Variety is the spice of life, right? And I feel like you've definitely lived a very varied life when it comes to writing. Um, Thinking about comic books here, I was doing some research and ended up learning that you were working in DC Comics in the DC office around the 1980s, which for a lot of folks, like, that's some of the best time for DC Comics. Off top of the head is your Watchmen, your Dark Knight Returns, the Question series comes to mind. Like, a lot of, like, kind of really gritty DC Comics were being put out at the time, on top of, like, the British invasion. And I guess what do you remember from your time working at DC during that time? Like, does any memory come about? Did you learn anything that you kind of carried with you throughout the rest of your career, or
I
even
mean, I
now
learned,
writing comic books now?
yeah, I learned a ton. I mean, Watchmen came out while I was there,
Oh, wow.
and I shared an office back then with Julia Saba, who um, was the design in charge of design for the Watchmen book. Not the artist; she was in charge of designing the package, right? So, for those of you who've read the original Watchmen comics, Alan Moore at the end of each issue would write some text feature, which Dave Gibbons would illustrate with, like, something that was supposed to be a photograph or whatever.
Or like a
Um,
newsprint or something.
and so one of these, I think for issue 7, could be wrong. It's been 40 years, but uh, one of them was Rorschach's psychiatric file. And so Julia's job was to design how the file looked on the page, so there was sort of that file folder, and you turn the page and there was the psych report, and there were photographs of Rorschach, which Dave Gibbons actually drew. And then there were, an illustration that Rorschach drew as a child, which Dave Gibbons also drew. But then, it was typeset. It wasn't lettered like a comic book. It was typeset. And then there was one space on this form for Rorschach's thumbprints. And Julia sort of yells across the office. It wasn't that big an office, but she yells across me. She says, "Come over here." So I did. I didn't know why I was going over there at the time. And she literally grabbed my thumbs, stuck them onto an ink pad, and then onto a piece of paper. And so if you look up the original Watchmen graphic novel, the collected, dozen issues, and you go to Rorschach's psych report, those thumbprints in the psych report, those are my thumbprints.
Wow.
I am Rorschach's thumbprints. And I think that's my main claim to fame in comic books.
That is an epic claim to Gargoyles be damned. Rorschach's Thumbprints by Greg Weisman. That is epic. Greg, let me ask you this. Working and living in both worlds of animation and TV, and I'm thinking about, like, we're on talking DC Comics, I can't help but think about Young Justice and some of the fans of that show that I know that live and breathe by it. They take it seriously. I guess, and considering your interactions with fans, who are the more rabid, or I guess I use the word enthusiastic. I think I saw you use that phrase to describe fans. Who's the more enthusiastic fan base? And this might also be a two-part question. Animation fans or comic fans? And then the second question, what's the more enthusiastic fan base between the Young Justice crowd and the Gargoyles crowd?
I think, in terms of your first question, there's so much overlap between comic book and animation fans. It's sort of hard to, you throw a rock at a comic book fan, how do you miss hitting an animation fan?
That's a good point.
Not that I'm throwing a lot of rocks, but you get what I mean. It just, that Venn diagram almost overlaps a lot.
Sure,
a lot. Particularly if you're talking about animated series based on comic books.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of which fans are more enthusiastic, I think there are two big factors. One is that Young Justice has been around a while now, 15 years. But Gargoyles has been around 30.
Sure.
And that's still got this really incredibly solid fan base. So you have to sort of check back in 15 years from now and see if that's still there for Young Justice. I like to think it will be.
Yeah.
But, it's the difference between a really, truly long haul when most of those years there was no new material. Young Justice has had years of no new material, but in the last 15 years, we did 2 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
We were canceled. We came back. We did 2 more. In between those, I also did Gargoyles, Young Justice comic books for DC.
Yeah.
We did a radio play, and there's been more to keep YJ alive in the short term, and that's a good thing. I'm not complaining. I wish were doing more still. I'd love to do a 5th season of YJ, but Gargoyles had literally decades where nothing was coming out, nothing
Yeah.
at all, and so that gives Gargoyles a sort of long haul cachet that, as great as Young Justice fans are, it can't quite match up to that level yet. Now, the difference between 30 and 15 years is big. The difference between, 50 years and 35 isn't as big. So we'll just see how things go as time passes. The other aspect that I think is really different is the internet. And the internet existed in the Gargoyles days, but it was really in its infancy.
Yeah. Basically,
And,
like just chat threads
and
and discussion boards.
it was not without rancor here and there, but not at a level like we see today. So, you get a lot of legit YJ fans, but who have decided for whatever reason that they like season 1, but they hate season 2. Or they like seasons 1 and 2, but they hate seasons 3 and 4. Or they like seasons 1, 2, and 3, but they hate season 4. Or and the thing that's different for me isn't that, because I don't need everybody to love every single thing I do. The thing that's different is that there's no sense of your mileage may vary in the internet today. It's all about absolutes. So someone doesn't come in and say, yeah, I like the first couple seasons and the second 2 seasons didn't grab me as much, which is fine. That's their, that's their
prerogative. Yeah.
completely up to them. They don't have to like it all. But most of them don't say that. Most of them say seasons 3 and 4 sucked. How can you like them? They are adamant, and they also let politics play in. So they start to say season 3 and 4 are woke. Show was never like that. I'm like, yeah, it was. It was always like that. Nothing's changed. I'm the same human being as I was. Brandon Vietti is the same human being as he was, my co-showrunner on it. It was always like that. Always. People tell me that Gargoyles wasn't woke back in the 90s. It was as woke as we knew how to be in the 90s. And anyone who thinks that's not true isn't paying attention. They're remembering it because they were, 8 or 9 years old back then and didn't think in political terms. So they don't think that it was woke then, but in fact it was. And the anger that goes with that now, to me, is makes it much more unpleasant. And so I had more fun with fans before the internet became what it has been in the last decade or so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great things about the internet. Probably, maybe, I don't know, but there's a lot of nastiness
totally
that
agree.
has come with that, and I think part of it's anonymity. I rarely have a bad time with fans at conventions, almost never. They come up to me I figure the ones who don't like my stuff, they just don't come up to me, and that's fine. But I almost never in person have someone come up to me and say, your stuff sucks, but they're happy to do that online
For sure.
because they
Keyboard
know there's
warriors.
no repercussions because I don't know who they are.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't do that to me.
Yeah.
They, and in person. And that level of rudeness. And again, I'm not saying they have to like it. That's not the point. But they don't need to be rude.
Yeah,
and
totally
that
agree.
level of rudeness on the internet today is a huge shift for me. Maybe I'm just too old to deal with it, I suppose. But
No, we could definitely have a longer conversation about toxic fandom, and I totally agree with your sentiment earlier about a lot of. I feel like woke is definitely a very easy cop out answer for it's an umbrella term for describing something that maybe goes against someone's personal views or whatever. But to your point, a lot of the shows that. In a lot of comic books too, it's like the term woke wasn't around then, but it essentially kind of fits that structure. It's
yeah, I mean, Star Trek, we didn't have the word, but Star Trek's been woke since 1966 or something like that.
And I think you say the same thing about many comic books that
Yeah,
people enjoy
X-Men.
now. Exactly.
X-Men.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's been a metaphor for racism from day one.
Get him, Greg.
And it's just sort of like you got to be kidding me. And so that to me, I find incredibly tiresome because you just want to sort of say this is just willful ignorance. I mean, just literally, you are choosing not to look even. I mean, you could even look at the surface. I was about to say to look beneath the surface. The fact is, you could look at the surface of X-Men that Claremont was writing in the 70s and 80s, that Stan Lee was writing in the 60s, that Roy Thomas was writing in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it was a metaphor for racism. It always has been. So it's sort of like, I don't even have to say you need to just look a little below the surface. No, just look at the surface. It's always been there. And so that I find very tiresome because it feels like people really working hard to maintain their blinders. And I've got no.
That's fair. Yeah, it is tiresome irony at that. It's very weirdly ironic. But Greg, I want to shift gears and maybe actually wrap up this
so
part.
that I can stop yelling about the internet. That's probably a good idea.
I want to leave on a positive note here because one of the interesting things I ended up learning during my research is that for a long time, I think from 97 to 2003, there was a dedicated Gargoyles fan convention called The Gathering. I was curious if you could shed a little more light on that and then maybe share what is the most prominent memory you have of that kind of that fandom, that fan gathering / that Gargoyles convention.
Well, I made a lot of great friends there among the fans, and even among the guests. I mean, Tom Adcox, the voice of Lexington, he and I were always friendly, but we didn't really truly become friends until we started going to this convention. Now he's literally one of my best friends in the world.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And I thank the conventions for that because we knew each other. He'd come to the voice sessions. We got along. It's not like there was animosity, but we just didn't know each other well because he'd come to the session. I'd be busy. He'd be busy. Then we'd leave the session. It was all polite and everything, but it wasn't until we started going to conventions together that we really became close. The Gargoyles convention started in New York in '97. It was started by one woman on the internet who sort of said, hey, we've got all these fans on the internet. What if we all got together? And what if we brought Greg Weisman to the convention so he could talk to us about it? And she organized the whole thing by herself, completely by herself, burned herself out so much that she didn't come again for 10 years. But she got it rolling.
Yeah.
And
that's all it takes.
And we went, I think the last year was want to say 2009 or something. I don't know. I can look it up in 5 seconds. But it was fantastic. I think the most fun sort of memory is from the very first convention. Let's see. So it went from 1997 to 2009, and it traveled. Kind of like the Olympics, people would bid, okay, we want it in our city next year. So we did a couple of years in New York. Then we went to Dallas, then Orlando, then LA, then Williamsburg, back to New York, Montreal, Las Vegas, back to Los Angeles, Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, Chicago, and then again, our last one was in LA. But at the very first one in New York, a couple things. One is that I didn't know what I was walking into. I'd been to very few conventions, and most of what I'd been to were, higher level pro organized things like San Diego Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm.
And this was at a hotel, and it was in the basement, conference rooms of this hotel in New York City. And they'd flown me out there, but I literally hadn't met anybody. I called a buddy of mine. I used to live in New York when I worked at DC Comics. I since had moved back to LA, which is where I'm from originally. But I'm in New York, and I call a buddy of mine who's in New York, and I say, hey, come over here because I don't know what I'm walking into. So just come with me. So me and my friend Doug, we go down to the basement, and they're doing a trivia game, sort of like Hollywood Squares, but with all Gargoyles trivia from the show. And at some point, someone says, well, Greg was supposed to be center square, but he didn't show up. And I'm like, no, I'm here. Because, no one knew what I looked like.
Sure, yeah.
And so they all turn, and you can tell that there are at least half of them thinking, that can't be there. That short guy? No. And the other half are like, oh my God. And so I get pulled in to this trivia game, and I'm actually pretty nervous because I'm like, what if they know more trivia than I do on my own show?
They're going to take my nerd card.
But then the other thing is that at the time, Keith David was living in New York. And so I was there, and I was at this convention, but I said, hey, are you free? You want to get together for dinner? So he says, sure. And he shows up to dinner with this young woman, Dion. And we're talking at the dinner, and I'm sort of telling him about this convention. I'm saying it's sort of fun. I say, if you want to show up, they'll go absolutely bananas for you. And he's like, yeah, I'll come. And I said, okay, I'm not going to tell them that way. If you change my mind, he's like, I'm not going to change my mind. And I said, great. And I paid for dinner because, I found out later that this was his first date with Dion.
Oh, wow.
And I paid for dinner on their first date.
Oh, that's lovely.
And they later got married and had 2 kids.
That's lovely.
So I go back to the convention, and I'm doing this Q&A at the convention. And I know Keith is coming. So halfway through the Q&A, I go, and ladies and gentlemen, Keith David. And they all turn around gasping, but he wasn't there. Right. And I said, I'm just kidding. And they were like, oh, you're horrible. And we
Could you do that, Greg? Come on.
And then a little bit later, not very long, but a little bit later, I see Keith and Dion standing at the back of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go, ladies and gentlemen, Keith David. And they're like, oh, you're not going to fool us again, And then you hear Keith's voice from the back saying, hello. I can't do Keith's voice. I won't pretend.
Sure. No one can.
But they all knew Keith's voice. And silence fell across the room. And slowly they turned and looked as he comes walking up the aisle towards me, and they then went bananas.
Wow.
And that was the first Gargoyles convention. Keith was there, I was there, and it just took off from there. And we did it for again from '97 to 2009, and it was a truly wonderful experience for me. And again, I made tons of friends there among the fans, and I
Dang, that
made
is
better friends with people in the group.
That is an awesome story. Like that is one of the best stories I've heard on this pod. That is great because you know, and you kind of knocked out two questions in one because I was going to ask, selfishly, big fan of Keith David myself. One of these sound drops I actually picked up from the website is this classic right here.
I've been denied everything.
I mean, the amount of quotables from just Gargoyles alone for Keith David is numerous. I'd be here all day. But I was going to ask if you had a favorite memory of Keith David, but I don't even want you to answer that because I feel like that story you gave was epic. So with that being said, let's move on to talking about the Demona series. I could pick your brain all day about. I don't know what it is, but the Gargoyle fandom to me is just so fascinating. It makes me want to watch the entire series, read all of the comic books. There's something, I don't know, just very interesting about them, and hearing your the way you speak about them and the conventions. It'd be great if I had a time machine that had like unlimited usages. I'd probably go to that first one. But with that being said, let's talk about Demona.
I like how you make up a time machine, and you have to make sure that when you make up this time machine, you're making sure it's got unlimited uses. Like otherwise, time machine you make up would have limited uses.
That's a very good point. Very good point, Gray. I don't know why I would only get a time machine with like one use. That'd be a waste of a time machine. But okay,
you have to upgrade to the full package.
You're right. I got to think bigger. I got to think bigger, Greg. You're right. I'm over here thinking small time. Unlimited usage right here. Okay, I might as well just have time travel powers. Fuck a time machine. Okay, Demona. It's a brand new series. It comes out. Issue 1 comes out May 28th, which will be the same time this episode airs. People are hearing it now. I'm actually going to take a break from asking questions and let a good friend of mine, the sponsor of this here show, Ben Kingsbury, the owner of Gotham City Limit, ask you a question about the new series. So some quick background before I press play on his voice message is that the Demona series, which comes out today, issue 1, a lot of fans actually got a preview of the Demona series during Free Comic Book Day. There was a Free Comic Book Day Gargoyles Demona issue that had 2 stories in one that were kind of pretty much connected, but 2 separate stories is what we'll say. And with that context, let's hear from Ben.
Hey, Greg. I'm Ben K, representing Gotham City Limit, a comic shop in Jacksonville, Florida. Thanks so much for taking a minute to be here today. My favorite day of the year just happened, Free Comic Book Day, and we threw a huge community party. We handed out 400 copies of Gargoyles Demona number 0. We love that you decided to highlight Demona. Just love a great villain. So here's my question. Do you have a specific approach to writing Demona's villainy to make her so compelling and relatable to readers and fans? I'll leave you to answer. Thanks so much for the passion you put into everything you do. We literally couldn't do it without you. And remember, Short Box Nation, we'll always take it to the limit.
Big shout outs to Ben. I was there for Free Comic Book Day. It was insane, the line that he had. Literally from, they were supposed to open at 10. I think I got there like 9:40-ish, thinking that, I'll just, hang out for a while. No, he already opened up the shop early, and he had this line that was wrapped around the block. And I left around 10:30, 11 because I had to host a party. And I was told by friends who showed up around 4, it was still wrapped around the block. So they had a very successful Free Comic Book Day. I can absolutely believe them giving out 400 copies of Demona. But his
That's
question
great.
to you, good sir.
I mean, there are 2 things about writing Demona. One is that, Demona was brought to life by Marina Sirtis, and I have Marina's voice in my head. It's locked in. So writing for her is relatively easy because I know I've got that sound in my head. I've got that sense of how she delivers a line, how she talks. and that helps me write the dialogue immensely for that character. But I also think Demona was, particularly in the 90s, a really unique kind of villain. Layer upon layer of complexity to that character. She has some legit gripes, but she's also her own worst enemy. The cause of most of what's gone wrong in her life is herself. So I think that richness of character keeps things interesting. The idea for this miniseries, which was Frank Parr's idea, I've been doing Gargoyle comics with Dynamite for a couple of years now.
Oh, yeah.
And Frank approached me and said, hey, what if you and I did something with Demona during that 1,000 years when she was awake and alive and all the other gargoyles were sleeping as stone statues? And I'm like, that's great. That actually dovetails with some stuff that Dynamite's been asking for and Disney's been asking for. And, I've got this timeline for the whole Gargoyles universe that's over 400 pages long. And I'm constantly adding to it. Every time I write any Gargoyle story, it gives me ideas for 3 or 4 more, and I add those to the timeline. What that means is, and I don't want to make it sound like I've got fully written stories at the time. I don't. But I've got these certain tentpoles. This event happens this year. This event happens there. Frank and I talked through that timeline. And look, it's a 5-issue miniseries. I'm not going to pretend that we're going to cover 1,000 years in 5 issues. Lots happens across a millennium. But we're going to sort of show 5 snapshots of Demona's life across the first couple hundred years of this 1,000 years. Each story, each issue tells its own unique story. There's a through line to the 5 issues, or to the 6 issues if you count Demona Zero. But each story has its own feel to it. They're all a different genre. Issue 1 is historical fiction. Issue 2 is swashbuckling adventure. Issue 3 is horror. Issue 4 is mystery. And issue 5 is an elegy. So they've all got their own feel, their own tone. They're all set in different years and different places. So Frank and I went through and we picked a couple tentpoles, and we came up with a few stories that fall between the tentpoles. And with that mix, throwing in a handful of other characters that the fans would know as we go along, but really focusing on Demona and a new character, her foster daughter, Angelica, as the through line for the 5 issues, I think has given us something truly special. And Frank's art is just gorgeous. I mean, just knocks me out. And it's colored by Robbie Bavard, who was our colorist on a bunch of the SLG Gargoyles issues that we did back in 2007, 8, something like that. And so it feels a bit like got Jeff Eichelberry doing the letters. He's been our letterer on the Dynamite books, and Nate Cosby's my editor on it. And it feels a little bit like an all-star team, and it's just been truly, a blast to do it. And Demona, again, is a character of endless fascination. I think the fans are going to enjoy this.
Yeah, I had a chance to read the free comic book day issue actually this morning, and I gotta say, yeah, Frank Parr's artwork is insanely good. It brings me back to the original cartoon, but in comic form. It's got energy. It's got it's you could tell he's putting in like some of his best work. Channeling the cartoon, but bringing it into a comic format. The colors
Let me tell
pop.
you, it's hard for Frank because Frank is. You called him an animator earlier, and that's not true. Frank came up as a storyboard artist,
Okay,
and a director, and so he draws all the time. He almost never finishes a drawing. It's all pencil work. It's not inked.
wow,
Right? Because you don't ink a storyboard. You just pencil it, and it's not even necessarily that tight. You probably penciled one panel tight, and then the next few aren't. right? Because you get the idea. It's just to show how things are moving. So this is a challenge for him that he has. I mean, he's admitted this to me. He's like, I've never had to finish a piece of art before, and now he is. And boy, is he knocking it out of the park. I mean,
I'm so glad you. Actually, I'm glad you said that, because that provides context and to what I was trying to describe. That he does have a very sketchy, frenetic kind of pencils, and his lines are, are definitely like they feel alive. That's what I'm trying to get at.
We
There's
were
a lot of
talking
energy.
just yesterday, and
Hmm.
he was saying, it depends on whether the character is still or supposed to be in motion. So he's like, when the character's still, I've really got to finish that out. So there's
Wow,
the splash
that
page of
makes
Demona
sense.
Zero is a good example where
Yeah.
she's still. There are other pages. There's a full page spread where she's smashing this case at the museum, and that's in motion. And he's like, you don't want it too tight when it's in motion, because you want that feel of blur, that feel of movement in there. So he's got a real great sense of when to nail it down and when to keep it loose, and it's just turned out fantastic.
Yeah, I gotta say, it looks great. I'm excited to see, what a full 22 page, comic from him looks like. But staying on the topic of the uh, uh, free comic book day title for Demona. So there was two stories, right? We're getting issue 0 of the new Demona series, but then there was a backup story that I could use a little more, maybe more information. But if you've read, I'm talking to listeners now. If you read the free comic book day issue, that second story, there was just a crazy surprise cameo by none other than the Fantastic Four, which, Greg, I got to say, as someone who grew up a Marvel head, still loves and reads Marvel, and then, as a Gargoyle fan, I never in 1,000 years, or in this case, 100 centuries, would have thought I would have seen a crossover like this. I guess, how'd you pull this off, and where'd the idea to combine these two franchises come from?
I think it came from Disney. Disney owns Marvel and Disney owns Gargoyles.
Makes sense.
They've licensed Gargoyles out to Dynamite, but I think Gargoyles is doing fairly well. But Fantastic Four is Fantastic Four. You know what I mean? And there's a big movie coming out and that kind of thing. So they came to us, and
Oh, wow.
and I'm writing two. I've written them already. They're done from a script standpoint. The art's being done now.
So that'll be a separate series from Demona.
Yeah,
Okay.
separate thing. Okay. They both come out in the fall. Marvel is doing Fantastic Four meets the Gargoyles, and then Dynamite puts out Gargoyles meets the Fantastic
Wow.
Four.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
And they're the two stories they're each separate stories, but they're in continuity with each other, and with this little 4-pager at the end of Demona Zero. I think they're really fun stories. They both got very different feels to them, different editors, same writer, different artists, different editors. So they've got different feels to them.
Can you share who's doing the art for? Is the same artist doing the art for both of the
no.
crossover? Oh, okay.
I know the answer to who's doing the art for each one, but Marvel hasn't announced
that's fine
yet, so I don't feel comfortable.
Okay, no, that's completely
revealing
fine.
That, but George Camadeus, who was our Gargoyles penciler for Gargoyles 1 through 12, and for the Gargoyles Winter Special, which featured Bronx, and did that little 4-pager at the end of Demona Zero, where the Gargoyles first meet the Fantastic Four. George Camadeus is doing the Dynamite issue.
Cool.
I know who's doing the Marvel issue, but they haven't announced it yet, so I'm not sure if that's
fine.
secret.
I can definitely be patient for that. I just looked it up because I was curious, like, is this the first time that Dynamite and Marvel has done a crossover? And I don't obviously have time to like really dig into it, but I think it might possibly be, which I think is huge. Is a huge look for the Gargoyles.
I don't know the answer.
And the companies.
I don't. I'm not an expert on Dynamite's history, but I know that Gargoyles #1 from 2 years ago, or 2.5. I don't know. I've lost track of time. That was Dynamite's best-selling issue ever.
Wow.
Period. and which, is very gratifying to me, but also proves something that I've been trying to tell people for a long time, which is that Gargoyles has a lot of fans. Trust me.
Yeah.
Now they don't have to trust me. We've got hard empirical proof.
Yeah, you can look at the 12 years of the Gargoyle specific conventions that were world tour, well, U.S. tours.
Right. And Canada.
Oh, yeah. And Canada.
So I mean, I don't want to pretend that Gargoyles is as popular as the Fantastic Four. It's not, and Fantastic Four again has a big movie coming out this summer.
Yeah,
but I thought it was heartening that that Disney, Marvel, Dynamite, they all felt like, okay, Gargoyles can hold its own with Fantastic Four. And, I hope that it boosts attention to the property, that, a bunch of Fantastic Four fans or Marvel fans or whatever, go, all right, let me check this out. And they get intrigued by Gargoyles enough to start, picking up the Gargoyles titles.
Yeah. And I do want to correct myself. It looks like Marvel and Dynamite have crossed over in the past. Some titles I'm looking at is Spider-Man Red Sonja, Marvel Zombies versus Army of Darkness. There was an Avengers and Invaders series. So they have teamed up in the past, but it looks like those are kind of in the past, underline that part. So this is exciting that, but you know what I'm saying? Those kind of make sense. I guess, Greg, in your mind, why does Gargoyles and Fantastic Four make sense? Synergy with the movie aside, like I'm talking thematically, story wise. Yeah. I guess, like, how are you bringing them together?
What you have are two families: Manhattan Clan of Gargoyles and the Fantastic Four family, which is from day one been a family, both in Manhattan. You've got the Erie building where the Gargoyles live on Central Park South. You've got the Baxter Building in Midtown Manhattan, and they're both protectors. Gargoyles protect the city. Fantastic Four protects the whole world. But, Ben Grimm is a neighborhood guy, Lower East Side guy like Kirby was. And so, you've got this idea of these two first families. Gargoyles, one of the things that's been fun about Gargoyles, one of the things that happened in the 90s when we were making the show, it didn't end up working out, but there was a point, I was in a meeting with Michael Eisner, who at the time was chairman of the Walt Disney Company. This is somewhere around 94, 95, 96 maybe, but probably not 96. I guess probably 95. He wanted to buy Marvel Comics. Disney wanted to buy Marvel Comics. Michael Eisner wanted to buy Marvel Comics for Disney. Marvel was in bankruptcy, and he's like, we can get it for nothing. All the executives, I was like, that'd be great, but all the other big-time executives in the room talked Michael out of it. They said, no, you don't want to buy Marvel. It's a mess. It's a disaster. The rights to Spider-Man, you want to do it so you can make a Spider-Man movie. Well, Roger Carol has rights to Spider-Man. Sony has. You won't be able to make a Spider-Man movie. You'll be sued by all these different people. And Fantastic Four is with Roger Corman, but Fox also thinks it's a mess. You don't want Marvel. Now, of course, flash forward to 2000, I don't know, 8, 9, probably 9, 10, something like that. And Bob Iger buys Marvel for Disney, but has to pay a fortune for it. Whereas when Eisner wanted to buy it, he could get it for pennies, right? Because they were in bankruptcy at the time. But in that meeting, when they had successfully talked him out of buying Marvel, he goes, well, but we got a problem because Warner Brothers, they've got the DC Comics heroes like Superman and Batman. We don't have that at Disney, and we need a Disney action universe the way Warner Brothers has DC to draw from. And if it's not going to be Marvel, he turned to me and he said, can we make a Disney action universe out of Gargoyles? Start with Gargoyles and I said, absolutely. And so we did a bunch of episodes in season 2, New Olympians, Pendragon, and others. We developed a Time Dancer series, a Bad Guys series, a prequel called Dark Ages, a sequel series called Gargoyles 2199, all these things so that Gargoyles would be the first family of the Gargoyles universe, and we would have all these other heroes, and we would build a whole action universe. Now that went away. It evaporated because all sort of there was so much management shakeup at Disney that it just sort of evaporated and it didn't happen. But that's how Gargoyles was intentionally built, to make the clan the first family of the Gargoyles universe. And when you look at Marvel back in the early 60s, that's exactly what Fantastic Four was. It was the first family of the Marvel universe. And, then they create Thor and they create Iron Man and Spider-Man and all these other characters, the Avengers, and they start crossing them all over. But the first family, headquartered at the top of the Baxter Building, is Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben, the Fantastic Four. And the first family of the Gargoyles universe, headquartered at the top of the Erie Building, is Goliath, Brooklyn, Lexington, Broadway, Hudson, and Bronx, and Angela. So we have these things in common going into these stories. There are other smaller commonalities. Lex's computer skills sort of match up with Reed.
Mm-hmm.
Angela and Sue have very similar personalities. Elisa. There are lots of elements that make them mesh. And I think part of what went into this, if I'm being honest, is I've been doing this book for Marvel for the last 15 months, The Spectacular Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And in a handful of issues, I had Johnny and Ben guest star in those issues. They show up at the coffee shop where Peter and Miles hang out on Wednesday afternoons. And so I think the folks at Marvel sort of said, hey, this guy writes Johnny and Ben pretty okay. He hasn't screwed it up anyway. So they had me write one story, just a short 10-page, 11-page story for an anthology, a Fantastic Four anthology that I think comes out this summer.
Okay.
And I guess I didn't screw that up either. So that when they were saying, hey, let's do a crossover between Gargoyles and Marvel, Greg knows how to write Fantastic Four. Let's do Fantastic Four. And I think that was part of it. But I just think that, again, it's sort of a compliment to Gargoyles that they think we are doing well enough that it's worthwhile to mix these two properties.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense when you break it down like that. I know that you are extremely spoiler adverse, so just blink twice if I'm anywhere close. Are we going to get a scene with Broadway and Ben Grimm sharing a slice of pizza or a cigar? I was just testing you, Greg. Okay, Greg, I'm like, I feel like we have gone through almost everything. I know I've actually got hundreds more questions at Gargoyles, but I also know that I can't do a 7-hour podcast today. I guess I'm looking at my list of questions, and there's one here that's a little selfish. It's for me, but I gotta know because I was on the Gargoyles wiki page, which was extremely fun to peruse and read through. And there was a part here that I'd like you to confirm or give some backstory or if just call it off as a BS. Is it true that Jordan Peele submitted a pitch for a live action or maybe an animated Gargoyle film back in like 2018?
A pitch may be overstating it. But Jordan, I had very limited contact with Jordan. I mean, we just exchanged a couple of messages on what was then called Twitter, private messages, because we follow each other. But or at least I followed him, and he did follow me at least for a while. I don't know if he still does. But I think he just expressed to Disney an interest after Get Out. I don't think this comes as a surprise. A lot of companies were wooing Jordan and wanted
he was hot
him
shit.
to do some work for them. And in his conversation with Disney, he expressed an interest in doing a Gargoyles live action movie. And at the time, my understanding is that Disney didn't say no, but they also didn't greenlight anything. So it never went any further than that. So sort of, I mean, maybe it was a pitch, but it's not a pitch I ever heard. My sense of things from our, again, very brief communication, it was less of a pitch and more just that interest, Gargoyles interest. But nothing ever came of it. And then he went on and made a bunch of other things.
But it's gotta kind of feel good to know that someone of Jordan Peele's like caliber and, fame is interested in a fan of I mean, he's got to be a fan if he's, pitching and showing interest. I think that's awesome.
It made me very happy.
There we go, Greg. Oh yeah. All right, Greg. I guess I got another question for you on the topic of Demona, Dynamite. This is, I mean, you've been with Dynamite and back to writing Gargoyle comics for the past, I think, going on maybe 3 years now. I think Dynamite got the Gargoyle license back in 2022, and I think the first series that they put out with you as writer was either 2022 or 2023, one of those years. And since then, you've written that was either, I think, a 6 or 12-part series. There was the Gargoyles Dark Quest or Quest series, and then a Dark Ages series. It seems to your credit, Gargoyles is, back in the forefront, back in the spotlight when it comes to comic books. How does it, I guess, what is it about? What is it like working with Dynamite and on the property? Like, it sounds like, they're giving you kind of free reign to do a lot, and they're empowering you and bringing in like old colleagues and showrunners from the show. How's it been working with Dynamite on the Gargoyle property?
It's been fantastic. I mean, we talk about what I'm going to do before I do it. It's not like I'm catching people off guard, but I am given a lot of freedom in terms of how I execute things. And I have a great relationship with Nate Cosby, who's been my editor on all these Gargoyles books. So yeah, it was 12 issues of Gargoyles, 6 issues of Gargoyles Dark Ages.
Mm-hmm.
We did a Halloween special, 5 issues of Gargoyles Quest, and then a winter special. Now Demona Zero, and now 5 issues of Gargoyles Demona starting May 28th. We have a couple Fantastic Four books coming out in the fall. We have other things in the works and in planning stages that we haven't announced yet, so I'm not going to talk about them. But the fact that I love that Gargoyles is working for Dynamite, that they're happy with it. We started that Gargoyles Demona series, and then after we were, Frank was only part way through drawing issue 1 when it was like, wait, we need a Zero. We need a Demona Zero, because we're going to use Demona as Dynamite's free comic book day book.
Smart.
And that was great. That was great news. It sort of, we had to stop the train and switch over to Zero, because Zero was going to come out before 1. But we got it done, and 1 is coming out on May 28th. And so I'm happy it's working. It doesn't surprise me, but I'm happy it's working for Dynamite. They've been great about supporting the book, and yeah, I have a lot of freedom to do what I want to do from a storytelling standpoint, and no one's sort of telling me this is what Gargoyles is. They're letting me tell them this is what Gargoyles is, and I like that.
Damn right. Who wouldn't? Man, no, that sounds great. It feels like Gargoyle has found a great home for Dynamite. It's a company that has so many. I mean, it floors me sometimes keeping track of what licenses and properties they have, but they seem to do all of them justice. They seem to do, put in a lot of care and effort and thought into the creative teams they put out, the marketing and all of that. So I'm very happy for you, and I'm extremely happy for the Gargoyle fans, because they are eating good. I mean, the amount of comic books that have come out in these 2-3 years for Gargoyles has been super impressive. So I'm extremely happy for you, Greg. I got one more question for you, and this is to all the aspiring writers and creatives that are currently listening. Greg, if you could you know what? Let's bring back the time machine. Let's say that for some reason you have a time machine that's got, just one setting, and that's to go back in time to your younger self as you're trying to break in. And you have the ability to give him a single piece of advice that hopefully will make his life easier. What would that be? I guess in general, what's your advice for anyone that's listening that wants to try to be the next, wants to be the next Greg Weisman?
Again, that's a dubious goal. But if we're literally saying I need to give advice to young Greg, then my advice to him would be to chill the fuck out. And I was often, not always, but often a young, angry guy, and I like to think I've mellowed, and I think mellowing has been helpful on all sorts of levels. Doesn't mean I'm not passionate about the work still. I am extremely passionate about the work, and the rule of thumb for me is, and this is the advice I would give to most of me specifically, young me specifically, because young me knew this actually. But the piece of advice I give to writers all the time is write what you're passionate about. Because if you're not passionate about it, how can you expect anyone else to be passionate about it? The level of passion shows in the work. So if you're just knocking it out, the readers will, I don't mean consciously, they'll just sense, whether it's a TV show or a movie or a comic book or a novel or whatever, piece of music, you could be a musician, you could be a dancer, I don't care, any creative endeavor, you've got to pursue your passion. And that was what we did on Gargoyles. That was our rule. When we sat down, it was me and Frank Parr, Michael Reeves. From day one, it was like, let's make the show we want to see. And we'll just cross our fingers that the audience likes what we're doing. But if we make a show trying to guess what the audience wants, try to seek that out, try to pander to them, then we won't give a damn about it, and they'll be able to tell. Maybe not consciously, but deep down, they'll feel that this thing is flat. So we wrote the show. We wanted to see what we were passionate about. That's the rule of thumb I've used through Gargoyles, which, going even further back to Captain Atom, Young Justice, Spectacular Spider-Man, Star Wars Rebels, anything and everything I've done, even individual episodes of that I just freelanced for Kim Possible, or Batman the Brave and the Bold, or Men in Black the series, or anything like that. It has to be something that I feel a real passion for, because if I don't feel passion for it in the work, no one else is ever going to be able to do that. So that's the advice I give to people who want to be in the business. The advice to myself is, yeah, I get it. You're passionate about it. You don't have to be a jerk. So that's kind of the advice I would give to young me. I was already passionate. I wasn't short on that. But
That's great.
For other people, that's what I would recommend.
Those are great words to live by. Really quick, I'm going to end it, but I just thought of a question that I want to work in that I'm going to edit into the earlier of the conversation. Was there ever any hesitance about? I mean, it's safe to say there's a lot of adult themes, in Gargoyles. You mentioned a few. I mentioned, it being very kind of like drawing upon Shakespearean lore and stories. I guess, was there ever any hesitance in making the show, I guess elevated like that? I guess for lack of better terms, was there ever any hesitance in making a kid's show so adult? Welcoming, welcoming to adults with these adult themes. Did that ever backfire?
No, I mean, we wrote on layers, and you talked about it yourself. We had to hit boys 6 to 11. That was our target audience, boys 6 to 11. It was a big part of our show. The budget was provided by Kenner Toys, selling Gargoyles action figures. So we had to hit that target. but that target wasn't enough for me, or Frank, or Michael, or anyone working on the show. I wanted girls 6 to 11. Hell, I wanted kids who were 4 and 5. I wanted tweens and teens, and I wanted adults. I wanted college students, and I wanted 30-year-old geeks like me. A 61-year-old geek now, but back then I was 30. And so we wrote on layers. There's plenty of the stuff you talked about. There's cool monsters flying around the city. There's explosions. There's a lot of eye candy in the show. So if you're young and you're watching it, it's just fun. But we also wrote on layers so that there's stuff for your dad or your mother-in-law to get out of it as well. We wrote Shakespeare, but we wrote, but you didn't have to know Shakespeare to understand it. You know, you didn't have to know that Macbeth was a Shakespeare play in order to understand the character of Macbeth in Gargoyles. He was hunting, you know, and he was trying to capture Demona. You know, we paralleled the story of Othello in our story of Coldstone, but you didn't have to have read Othello in 6th grade in order to understand this story. Everything you needed to know was in the show. But by the way, if you're a 20-year-old who's just read Othello in college, you'd be looking at that episode and going, it's Othello, you know, and that would be cool for you, right?
Yeah,
you know, but you didn't need to know that to watch the show. And that's what I mean about writing on layers. You can't leave the kids out. You can't write it in such a way that the kid can't comprehend what they're seeing. They have to be able to go with you. But you can have stuff in these shows, whether it's Young Justice or Spider-Man or Rebels or Gargoyles, that also appeal to adults so that it holds up. I mean, the thing about Gargoyles that holds up, Gargoyles holds up very well. And I absolutely would love it if everyone would go on to Disney Plus and rewatch the show if you've seen it already, or watch it for the first time if you haven't. It's terrific. And it holds up. And I know I'm biased, but I think it holds up extremely well. In fact, the only thing that sort of even gives away that it's a 90s show are the cell phones. Because when David Xanatos pulls out a cell phone, it's the size of a brick with a big antenna sticking out of the top. But short of that, everything else about it might as well be happening right now. And there are probably a couple other exceptions too that I'm just not thinking of at the moment. But for the most part, and certainly from the standpoint of the characters and the themes and the storytelling, all of that holds up really well. I take a substantial amount of credit for that, but I share all that credit with guys like Frank and Michael and Jamie Thomason and Keith David and Marina Sirtis and all the people we've talked about, Tom Adcox, over the course of this podcast. There were literally hundreds of people who worked on that show and put all their passion in it as well, as much as I put mine in it. And it shows, even now, 30 years later, it shows in those episodes. And I think in the comics we did with SLG back in 2007 and 8, and the comics we're doing now with Dynamite, that passion still shows through from me, from the artists working on the book, certainly from Frank and Robbie on Demona. And that passion and that storytelling, I think, carries through and makes the property still incredibly viable.
100% agree on that. And I think with that, it absolutely holds up. And I think I know what I'm doing later this weekend for sure. I think I'm about to go on a Gargoyle binge session.
I'm all in favor.
I bet you are. You know what? All right, Greg, I was actually going to wrap us up, but this is not live. So I have one last question. It could be super short. But you brought up. All right, let me take it back. All right. Greg, I can't help but ask this since you brought up the SLG Gargoyle comics. I don't know if you're aware of this, but those comics are not cheap, especially the collected graphic novels. Some of them go upwards to hundreds of dollars. I guess there's not a huge print run, but old Gargoyle trade paperbacks are very expensive. But what is not expensive are some of the newer stuff coming out. Like I think recently, I think it was NECA. It could have been another company, but NECA put out this awesome Goliath figure that came with the. I mean, it's whatever, about a 6, 8, maybe 10-inch figure. It had wings. You could buy the accessory to get like the cloak version. I see you rummaging through your office. I imagine you're about to bust it out. There it is. Yep, that one right there. So, with that being said, I have a feeling you have probably every piece of gargoyle collectible out there. What is the coolest piece of gargoyle collectible in your opinion? What's your favorite? Whether it be comics, toys, games, etc.
I mean, I have a ton. I doubt I have everything. In fact, I'm positive I don't have everything. I've got a couple posters. One is on the wall back there, but I just don't think there's any way you see it. That I just think it's sort of a fantastic painting, and I've got some cells that are pretty that are knockouts. You mentioned the SLG trades. We did a Kickstarter with Dynamite because they're reprinting those SLG stories. The people who contributed to the Kickstarter get first shot at it, but I'm sure Dynamite's going to put those out so that other people can get them as well. They're doing the Marvel books, which I didn't work on from the 90s. I was too busy making the actual show to work on those comics. But and we don't consider those canon, but that doesn't mean they're great stories with tremendously talented people like Amanda Connor on them. And then they're doing 2 books that reprint the SLG stuff. One reprints the 12 issues of Gargoyles we did back in 2007-ish. I can't quite remember what year. And one reprints the 6-issue Gargoyles Bad Guys spinoff. And those will be coming out, I think, later this year. And so I'm partial to the comics that we've done because I wrote them. But you know, I've got a lot of cool Gargoyles stuff, including a macrame Goliath that a fan made and gave to me. You know, cool. We celebrated in Minneapolis last July, 30th anniversary of Gargoyles. A bunch of Gargoyles fans, new and old, showed up to that convention, and one of them, a guy named Matt, who I've now known for over 20 years, he brought me a gargoyle egg, a life-size gargoyle egg.
Whoa.
And so, you know, I've got a lot of cool stuff that the fans have made for me. And then, yeah, I can't really turn my computer enough for you to see it, but that Goliath figure I pulled out, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I got 8 Goliath figures over there from various eras.
That's awesome.
And you know, I love all that stuff. I'm a big geek, and again, it's almost embarrassing because I'm a huge fan of my own stuff.
But you know, I think it goes back.
Shameless about it.
But I think it goes back to what you were saying about, you know, having the passion and, you know, being passionate about the things that you do. So I don't think there is any shame in being proud of what you've done with the Gargoyles. And I think with that being said, ladies and gents, this is the Short Box Podcast, and we just finished talking to Greg Weisman about the brand new Gargoyles Demona series. And obviously a bunch of other things revolved around Gargoyles. I was going to get around to the Spectacular Spider-Man and some other stuff. But as you can tell, I was really fascinated by Gargoyles. So hopefully you had a great time hearing us chat about the Gargoyles. Be sure that, let me go back. Once again, Gargoyles Demona, issue 1 is in shops right now, May 28th. Be sure to pick that up, put that on your pull list. And if you're not following Greg Weisman on social media or the official website, go ahead and correct yourself, right? I'll have links to follow Greg in this episode show notes. I'll have a preview of the Gargoyles Demona, the solicitation, all of that in the show notes. Please take a look. Greg, any parting words or shameless plug before we wrap up?
If you're saying this is coming out May 28th?
Same day. I'm gonna drop it on debut day.
So yeah, pick up Demona #1. Pick up by this time. Spectacular Spider-Man #15 is also out. If you haven't been reading Spectacular Spider-Man, I'm also really proud of that book. And issue 15 came out May 14th. So check that out. And otherwise, have a great night.